guys, Matt at Middleton Motorsports here. Another episode of Behind the Tune. So today on the dyno, something a little different. I know I've said that in the past when we got different stuff up here on the dyno. But we're going to continue with our eclectic collection of stuff that we tune here at Motorsports. And as you can see behind me, this is a Chevy Sonic. So I'm going to turn the camera around. We're going to kind of take a look at this thing. So this vehicle is owned by a guy I've known for a long time. I was in business with his dad, a repair shop that we owned together, and prior to that worked together. I actually worked with this gentleman's dad. The first shop I ever worked at back in my early 20s when I started as a tech, 20 some odd years ago. And he came to me, contacted me maybe last year about this project he had. And this is it. So this is a 2014. This is a 1.4 turbo. So this is an LTZ model. And this 1.4 turbo was an option in these cars. So I believe how the story went is he purchased this car. So this gentleman also owns a repair shop now. And he purchased this car, my understanding is kind of a little while ago, and it had a bunch of stuff wrong with it. And so he fixed it up for a daily driver. But he got a little overboard with the mods because it needed, I don't know if it needed an engine, but I know it needed a turbo and an exhaust and a bunch of other stuff. So he went with ZZP, and for you guys that haven't heard of ZZP, they've been around a long time. Another buddy of mine used to be into the 3800 GM supercharged stuff, and ZZP was one of the go-to companies for that platform. And ZZP also kind of latched onto this 1.4 turbo platform a while back. Again, this platform is now over 10 years old, so the stuff's been around. The Sonics, the Chevy Cruzes, this engine came in. And so he kind of went through the ZZP catalog and purchased some stuff to replace the factory stuff that needed replacing anyway. So he did one of their big wheel turbos, I believe it's called. So it's a stock frame, but it has a bigger wheel in it. I think it's still tiny. It's still like a 38 millimeter inducer on the compressor. Again, I don't know a whole ton about this platform, and I'll admit I'm a little green on tuning this platform. I've kind of messed with this stuff in the past a little bit. A friend of mine a long time ago had a 1.4 Cruise, and we played with the tuning a little bit from the factory, but it's still kind of the similar torque based as I can even call it similar to a Ford EcoBoost. It uses the same kind of strategy where you have a torque request, and this one's a little bit more airflow and boost based than like a Ford or a modern GM, like a Gen 5 DI V8 or something like that, but kind of a combination between the two. So I had to I will admit I did struggle with this a little bit earlier today, getting the boost curve nice and flat, and it having a bigger turbo on it. I had to kind of redo the duty, and we'll get into the tune a little later at the end of the video, but I had to redo some of the duty cycle stuff. Obviously a bigger turbo at specific wastegate duty cycles is going to make more boost. So I definitely had to adjust that. That's probably the thing I struggle with the most. And just trying to get, typically these factory turbocharged engines try to favor bottom end torque, and they kind of peter off at the top. So you can still favor the bottom end torque, but you can't go too crazy because you don't want to bend stuff and break stuff. But you still want to try to bring power in as soon as you can. And I was able to accomplish all of this after 7 hours on the dyno and about 10 dyno pulls later. But again, and I'll admit I'm a little green on this platform. After today, I'm not. I've got it pretty much figured out. But it does have that bigger turbo. It's got a ZZP Cold Air box type of deal. It still has a factory catalytic converter bolted to that factory frame turbo. So that is definitely a limitation. And we're on 91 octane. So straight gas, no ethanol, just the 91 that we get locally here, which is not the greatest fuel. It's still premium, but as far as premium goes, it's just not that great for trying to make power on boosted stuff like this, especially these small little engines that you're trying to put a lot of cylinder pressure to try to make something out of them. So bigger, it does have a bigger intercooler. Like I said, he kind of went through the ZZP catalog and purchased a bunch of stuff from them. So it does have the factory cat. It does have after the cat, it does have a full ZZP exhaust after that. And he simply did that because the factory exhaust was rotting off of it. It was all rotted out, rusty from Midwestern winters here. So it does have some go fast goodies on it, but we are still limited by, and I know I'm not trying to make excuses for what this thing makes for power, but those are the limitations, factory cat, and the fact that we're just running a 91 octane non-ethanol type of tune. So I'm kind of limited, and again, once I got the boost curve where I wanted it, I started to play with the timing and the boost, and I found the happy medium where it just wouldn't make any more power no matter what we did. So this is, and I'll mention too, this is an automatic transmission. It is a 6-speed automatic. So dyno in 4th gear. So this is about the best run I had at it so far. And the boost, you know, you can kind of see the dyno graphs kind of moving around. That's kind of a result of the boost control moving around a little bit. And just the fact that we're running such a low amount of timing, I'm 2-3 degrees of timing into it. But that's where it was making a little more power at a little bit higher boost level. Upper teens, 18 pounds is about where we're at here. And a little bit less timing. I did try pulling a bunch of factory, they run about 13 pounds of boost. So I did try bringing the boost down into the mid-teens and try to add in timing, and it just wouldn't make as much power. It smoothed the curve out a little bit, but I figured let's try to make as much as we can. And this is kind of a strategy on these small bore, 4 valve per cylinder, variable cam timing engines. It's just, you know, the factories do it, you know, all the boosted stuff does, the Ford boosted stuff, the BMW boosted stuff, the Mercedes, anything that's factory boosted, this modern stuff. Typically, you know, you got these really small combustion chambers with these really small bores, and the burn rate is very quick, and you're typically gonna make a little more power with a little more boost and a little less timing than you would opposite. You start getting into the V8 stuff, and I know I talked about it on the channel before, and there you're a little, you know, you kind of reach a happy medium of, you know, a little more timing and a little less boost. But on these smaller displacement engines, especially like a 1.4 4-cylinder, it's gonna have a really small little bore. And it's just not gonna need a lot of lead as it is. You know, normally aspirated, it is probably maybe even 20 degrees, maybe not even that, if you were to run an NA. So yeah, this is where we're at. And again, this was a lot of up and down with boost and timing, trying to find the happy spot of that cat restriction and just our octane limitation. So let's, it's nice and hot and humid today. So, but we have SAE correction, so we're getting a little bit of a correction for that. But I'm gonna do one more pull on it, and we'll take a look at that. Hopefully I can kind of match this, because it has been a little inconsistent on me, but I got the boost control pretty much just flat, about 70 to 71% duty cycle on the wastegate solenoid, straight across the board, and it still kind of wants, the boost kind of wants to do this. And you can kind of see that in the power curve, how it's kind of moving around on me. And the cam angles are running kind of smooth, are running really smooth. There's no choppiness to that. I think it's just an artifact of what we got going on here. So yeah, I'm gonna do another pull. We'll take a look at the data log, and I'll kind of show you guys where I was struggling a little bit earlier today. Typically these engines make about 120 at the wheels, 130 torque. So we're up a decent chunk. You know, if you want to go in percentages, that's a pretty big chunk of power over factory. Again, this car just came to me as is, so I never did any sort of baseline on it. Just kind of basing it on what I've seen on the internet. I know you can't always believe, but you know, you can watch videos, and there is some information on some forums that I sometimes use every once in a while for information like that. If I just don't have a baseline, I can find some stock dyno graphs and see what people have made stock. And I know it can be apples to oranges, dyno to dyno, but you find somebody else's, maybe 2 or 3 people that are tuning these things on a DynoJet, and they all are kind of lining up into that low 120 to 125 and about 130 torque stock for an automatic one. So let's do one more pull, record it, and we'll take a look at the data log, and we'll wrap this one up. So yeah, they're pretty much overlaid. That pull dropped off a little at the top here. It did look at the very tippy top, it looked like maybe it picked up like a degree of knock. And with such low timing, a degree of knock is a lot. So you can see it kind of got a little separated from that previous run. So, but otherwise you can see they're pretty much overlaying each other. Yeah, temperatures, we have this hot air front moving in right now, and it's getting kind of sticky. Even as the day weans on here and the sun starts to set, it's just getting worse. So, but these runs were pretty close together anyway, so really nothing to do with the weather. Yeah, I think that's looking really good. The power curve, we can kind of look at the dyno graph or the data log, and I was trying to bring kind of again, I was talking about before, I just wasn't trying to bring too much boost in down here. Again, I just don't know how strong these bottom ends are. I don't have a lot of experience with these things. And again, this being a daily driver, he's gonna drive it all year round. I just didn't want to try to bring in a whole ton of torque down here. So when it's -2 degrees outside and that turbo wants to light really fast, I was trying to kind of keep it a little softer down here and then trying to bring in some more, but I was trying to pretty much keep the boost curve flat. That was really my goal. I did end up playing with some cam timing. With the slightly bigger turbo, I was able to advance the exhaust cam, and that did help bring in the power earlier over the factory cam timing settings. I was able to move the peak torque kind of at the same wastegate settings from about here to about here, because it does, even down in here, the wastegate is pretty much just 100% duty cycle. It's just shut, and about 3,500 RPM it starts to open just preemptively. Again, I could have just let her eat all the way, and where you get that spike and then it starts to drop. I don't like tuning these smaller turbo vehicles like that, EcoBoosts included. I know you get that real sudden surge and hit of power. I see a lot of, every once in a while we'll get a BMW on here with a mail order tune, like an MHD tune, and a lot of the MHD tunes, like the off-the-shelf tunes, or even if they're custom tunes, they'll bring the stock turbos in so hard and it just hits the motor, hits the tires, and it kind of makes it, again, you know, certain cars you can do that on, but for like a street vehicle on street tires, it's just really hard on parts. It's really hard on the tires. It doesn't really make the car any faster per se. So I like trying to bring it in and try to bring the wastegate, start to blend the wastegate in it a little bit as the boost starts to kind of take off a little bit. You start to open the gate right about that point, and you can kind of then get a little more level boost, you know, so then the boost will just kind of come up and hit your target at the peak torque, and then boost just, you know, sends the same all the way across. And again, that was kind of the goal in this car, to give it some decent drivability. Again, and in the wintertime, when it's -2 degrees out and he's jumping on the highway or something and he wants to roll on the throttle, it's not trying to make 20 pounds of boost at 2,800 RPM, and that's where you start to break parts. So I had to be aware of that. There's also some tables that we can go over in the tune that limit boost per intake temp. So I definitely was aware of that table also. So yeah, that's where we're at. Again, through a factory cat, 91 octane. Definitely our limitations here, but otherwise, this is looking pretty good. So I'm gonna jump in the car here. We'll take a look at the laptop. So let's start. Kind of a lot to process here. If you guys want to see, you guys saw the dyno number, and again, basic bolt-on car, stock cat, but it does have that big wheel ZZP turbo. So basically what I got going on here is this, I did have to hook an external wideband to it, because these do not have a wideband, just narrow bands. And you got boost up here, so you can see where peak boost is coming in right about that peak torque number, super typical for a turbo car. You know, right where that turbo hits peak boost in the mid-range is typically going to be your peak torque. Not always, but typically. This thing was, another thing about this car is it was very, very sensitive, and I did make note of that in the tune and adjusted the tune accordingly, very, very sensitive to coolant temperature. So the difference in timing between like 180 degrees and 205 degrees is like 2 or 3 degrees of timing. I was able to have a lot more timing in it on cooler coolant temperatures than I was if you let it completely get super hot soaked, and more than typical, which is kind of surprising, but it just is what it is. So I made adjustments in the tune in the coolant temperature timing modifier to reflect that. So you can see here we're coming up to about 18 pounds of boost, and that's about where I was targeting. And again, I tried up to 20, and it just, had the timing 0. I mean, the timing was 0, if not going negative in some areas. So it didn't like 20. 19, still, the timing was 2, 1, and the dynograph was, I think because the timing was so low, the boost control was struggling to keep a nice even amount of boost. And even here you can see that the boost still is moving around a little bit. So my solenoid control it's moving around a little bit. That's right here. I found that sorry if this is crooked, guys, the way the laptop's sitting here is kind of goofy, but this camera kind of self-levels so it won't follow me holding this crooked. But anyway, 70%, 71%. So you can see as I'm scrolling across here, it's kind of hovering right around that 70%, maybe a little more. And that's where it was pretty flat on the boost. I had to bring a little bit more into the top to hold the boost out the top, so it was holding boost. Just a couple percent more. So yeah, that was how I achieved a nice flat boost curve. That's what I really strive to do on a lot of this daily driven turbo stuff, is I like to have the boost kind of flat all the way across. A lot of the factory stuff will drop the boost off at the top and try to bring it in as soon as possible. Now, I could have probably brought this boost in a little sooner, maybe 400 RPM sooner, but I figured about 3,500 RPM, 3,700 RPM was, for this much boost. Again, stock boost is 13, so you're talking, probably right about here. And I was trying to keep the boost stock kind of below 3,500, so that's why I kind of ramped it up to that point. I didn't let the boost take off to 18, 19 right at the peak boost where the stock boost would have peaked with the smaller turbo. But I definitely was able to pick up boost down, at the 2,000, kind of 2,500 area, this area, by advancing the exhaust cam 3 degrees. 1 degree was quite a bit, 2 degrees a little more, and then that 3rd degree gave me just a smidge more, so I stopped there. Down here, that exhaust position was about 13 degrees and retarded, and bringing it to like 16 degrees, it picked up probably 2 or 3 pounds of boost at about 2,500 RPM. And again, this is with the wastegate shut, 100% on the duty, wastegate shut. The turbo's trying as hard as it can to make boost. So I was trying to bring, and again, the slightly bigger turbo on this small, I know it's a tiny turbo, but it's a tiny engine. So again, for drivability and kind of daily driving stoplight to stoplight in traffic, I was trying to give them as much as I could down here, trying to put as much timing as I could in at the bottom end, trying to bring as much boost in. And so I really kind of concentrated down here, and then obviously on the spool up. And again, this is just stuff that did I have to do all that? No, I could have just thrown the peak boost numbers at it, let it just eat, and whatever it made, and that's what a lot of guys do, because they just want to see a big torque spike, big numbers, whatever. But again, this is not a sunroar only car. This car is going to see negative 0 degree temperatures, and it's going to want to try to make a lot more boost down here. Right now it's 90 degrees and humid and sticky, or 80. Yeah, I mean, you can see my intake temps are 90, it's hot and sticky right now. It's humid. So there's a table, and I have to dig back through this to find it, but bear with me here. And boost control, yeah. So this table limits the boost by manifold temperature. So that I did add. So obviously the factory is this. So you can see it's, you know, that's the limit. So, and there's other factors at play that limit the boost. This is the absolute highest. So I did raise this obviously because I did want to try to hit that kind of 18, 19-ish pounds of boost. But I still kind of left the taper. So in really cold temperatures, it's only going to, you know, maybe make the limit's going to be maybe 16 pounds. I just didn't feel like this, you needed to have this thing all racy and raced out and maxed out when it was super cold outside. And it's chucking a rod outside of, you know, out of the block when he's trying to get on the highway with it, trying to pass somebody. So, again, that's stuff you got to keep in mind when you're tuning these cars. If it's something that people are driving year round in Midwestern or, you know, northern half of the country or cold climates, and I've talked about this in one of the other videos. Maybe my buddy Shelby GT500, his 12 GT500. About keeping in mind of boost when it's cold versus hot and sticky. Today is, especially on a supercharged car, is going to be different when it's cold and dry. So when you're scaling timing tables, and now we're on a turbocharged car, and you can, you know, you're dealing with boost spikes and the way turbos light up and do stuff like that. They want to, when it's really cold, turbos will come on way quicker and way harder than they do when it's hot and sticky out. So anybody that drag races a turbocharged car and races it in a wide range of temperatures will know that when they're up on a trans brake, when it's cold and dry out, it'll come up on the chip and the 2 and 3 step way faster when it's cool out versus when it's 95 and humid. Same goes for this type of car. It's a turbocharged car, so we got to keep that stuff in mind. So I'm trying to think, there's a lot to kind of talk about, and I don't want to drag this out forever, but so timing, we kind of talked about that. This knock you're seeing down here, similar to this PCM, it's an E78, and it kind of bridges the gap between like a Gen 4 and Gen 5, if I had to say. It's somewhat torque based. A lot of what I had to do to get this boost curve flat was similar to like a Gen 5 V8, like an LT1, L83, L86, LT4, DI stuff. This engine is port injected, but sorry, I'm just kind of navigating through this. So this actually uses a peak torque, and then it uses a max torque. So basically, the way that the factory has is it flips it so one is smaller than the other to try to limit torque. Well, what I found was I had to basically had to flip it. So the max torque was slightly higher than the peak torque that you're asking for. Then I was able to make the boost curve nice and flat like I did. What I was really struggling with was about 4,800, 4,700 RPM. My desired boost and my wastegate duty cycle were just tanking towards the top, and my boost was dropping off. And subsequently, the power was kind of dropping off towards the top, and I really wanted this flat torque, the flat boost curve. Now, the factory turbo you probably couldn't do this with, but because it is a bigger turbo and it does allow for more airflow up here, the factory turbo would, no matter how much duty cycle you threw at it, would probably taper off after 6,000 RPM no matter what. But being a bigger turbo, with that in mind, I figured, hey, we can get this to ride a nice flat boost curve up. And again, I did try to add more boost up in here, even just at the top end, and we ended up with, again, 2, 1, and the power did not increase. So I messed with the cam timing, I messed with the boost, I messed with the ignition timing, all up and down. And where we're at right now is where it made the most power. This is just where it was. I was, I think one run maybe I made 160. As the boost was kind of, and it was really spiky. And the boost control was really erratic, and the timing was really erratic, and the dyno just picked up kind of a high spike at 160, which I don't want to leave it like that. I want a nice, as flat of a power curve as I could possibly get. So, and you can kind of see it here, and this is where I also struggled, was the boost control percentage, the percentage on the duty cycle, because of the bigger turbocharger, the base duty cycle table needed quite a bit of editing. So, and I had to kind of tailor it to this turbo. Otherwise, the PID control was kind of moving around, and I was getting these really wild up and down spikes. So this is factory. That's the factory table. So you can see up in here 75, 76. So, you know, I'm commanding somewhere in between desired pressure ratio. I'm commanding somewhere in between the 2.2 and the 2.5. So you can see it's probably about 80% it would be riding. That was way too much. So I ended up doing this where I had to pull some of this out and kind of riding in between these two cells, the 68 and 70. So I was right about 70%. That's where it was making that about 18 pounds of boost. And that's where I wanted it. So it took me a while, it took me quite a few pulls, again, because I have not tuned one of these cars with this turbo. I had no data for it. So I had to kind of go, like I said, I did like 10 pulls on this thing, partially to get this table dialed in. Obviously the timing. The fueling wasn't too bad. Stock injectors still on it. I did bump the fuel pressure up about 10 PSI just to give my injectors a little more headroom. You can see we're not quite there on the limit, but again, when it's cold out, it's gonna use all the injectors. It's gonna be all in on the injector. That's why, again, as the colder it gets, it's gonna start to pull boost about 50 some degrees Fahrenheit. It's gonna start trimming the boost down. It's gonna start reducing. The desired boost is gonna go down, and subsequently the desired pressure ratio is going to go down, and my duty cycle is going to go down. So I try to kind of tailor this table because, again, I don't have a way of doing this when it's 40 degrees. So I had to kind of guesstimate on the slope of the factory table and where I ended up here, and I had to kind of extrapolate it down. So I did, you know, I didn't pull in quite a bit of duty cycle, you know, 10% or so out of the top end of this table. I was able to add a little bit here and there in the bottom, but for the most part, again, I wanted to try to bring the boost in a little softer. I didn't want it to hit super hard. So hopefully this video isn't getting too long in the tooth for you guys. Again, you saw the power curve, the numbers with the mods, and if you're not interested in this stuff, you can always just skip to the next video or whatever you guys are doing. But if you're interested in this stuff, I like talking about it because I kind of nerd out about it, and I do this for a living, and I like a challenge. And I know there's probably guys out there that have done lots of these 1.4s and are probably rolling their eyes. Oh yeah, I knew that, blah, blah, blah. But again, this is maybe the third one of these I've touched in my life. And the first one I've touched with a bunch of mods on it like this. So especially a different turbo. So took a little bit of learning, but again, because I'm familiar with the way GM, the strategy works with the torque model, and the way they kind of look for a certain amount of airflow and a certain amount of torque together, a torque request. Obviously, there's the driver demand. It's similar to a Gen 5, where there's driver demand that's asking for a specific amount of torque, and then you have that peak torque table that is kind of the maximum torque that you're expecting the engine to see, and then there's just a limit of the max torque, that other table. So the kind of the combination of those, getting this duty cycle table dialed in. The fueling was, I did have to move the MAF curve around a little bit, maybe, 5% tops here and there. The factory also runs these pretty lean, and I did try to do that, and it didn't like it. It was knocking like crazy. So I did my tried and true, 0.8, 0.81, and 0.79, kind of that 0.8 average is what I was shooting for. The factory had it 0.85. For whatever reason, and then they were bringing in like cat over temp protection and turbo temp protection and all sorts of other stuff, and in my experience, you just zero that stuff out and just run a straight, let's get it on a gasoline scale, mid-11s to 1 air fuel, and that's where it was happy. That's where it liked it. That's where I had the smoothest power curve. That's where I could get the smoothest timing curve in it. The timing tables were kind of goofy too. It does use cam angles for some timing modifiers kind of earlier in the run, and then as you kind of get closer towards the top, it gets away from that and you're just running straight off the main spark tables and then whatever temperature modifiers there are. I did leave, like a Gen 5, it does have a static timing, so you can see this knock here, just like a Gen 5 LT1 or LT4. Like LT4s dial in like 3 or 4 degrees of timing retard on one of the cylinders. This was similar to that. I cut it in half, so it was pulling about 2 degrees off one cylinder, and the scanner will show that as total knock retard, but it's really just a timing pull on one cylinder, and I left some of that there. That's what this just straight line of knock is. When you see little bits of knock, and when I tune boosted cars and boosted GM cars and I'm looking at knock sensors, I'll allow little nibbles like this because I know that's probably about it. The factory will allow way more than that. The factory on an LT or even one of these will allow, you know, a degree plus of knock throughout the pull to kind of float in between the high and low octane tables. But I typically try to make the high octane table, and I did pull quite a bit of timing in some of the areas on the high octane because the turbo was more efficient in some of these lower areas down in here between 3,500 and 4,500. I had to pull quite a bit of timing because it did want to run maybe 6-7 degrees, and it was pulling quite a bit of timing on the knock sensor. So I did have to pull out. So you can see we're at just 4 degrees, right where the turbo hits, and it kind of carries that amount all the way across. Coming up on the top end here, I did have to reduce it back down a little bit. Typically, you know, with a nice flat boost curve, you can kind of ramp some of the timing in, but this engine did not like that. I tried to bring 4 or 5 degrees of timing up here, and it just wouldn't take it. It just would not take it. So I had to leave it about 3. That's where it liked it. That's where it was happy. Again, if we had better octane, we'd have, you know, obviously we'd have a totally different outcome if we were doing E85 or even just a couple gallons of E85. But this is, again, this daily driver, it's 91 octane. He wants to be able to pull up to any pump and just put premium in it and go. So, yeah, boost, timing, air fuel. I did raise the fuel pressure. Don't know what else I could talk about. I did talk about the torque tables. I didn't mess with the torque model at all. I didn't think that was necessary because of typically, unless you're going way beyond something where you're maybe on this platform, you're making 300 or 400 horsepower with the wheels, you might have to get into the virtual torque model. But being that we're making, you know, 30, 40 horsepower over stock, I didn't deem that necessary. I am going to get this thing out in the street and do a little bit of transmission tuning on it, maybe firm up the shifts smidge, and probably play around with the shift points. I haven't even looked at the shift points yet to see where it shifts. The factory rev limiter is at 6,500. Based on the power curve, what I'm kind of getting, we can probably rev it pretty close to that. And I'm not quite sure on the shift scheduling where I look at it for the first time with you guys, 6,000 RPM. So I could probably bump this a couple under RPM, maybe 300, maybe shoot for maybe 6,300. I don't like bringing the shifts up too close to the stock rev limiter, and I don't see the need to raise the factory rev limiter on this. Again, I'm not sure of the integrity of the valve train and stuff like that because I just don't have a lot of experience with leaning on this 1.4 liter engine to see where its limits are. So I might bump that a couple under RPM and, you know, just so if he is getting on the highway and he's to the floor, he can get a little bit more out of it. So, and then this also does, this is obviously a small front wheel drive 6-speed. I'm not sure exactly which model 6-speed this is. I know it is a 6-speed auto. But it does have the typical kind of 6L, 8L, 10L kind of pattern that operation that GM uses for all those clutch-to-clutch transmissions. So I'm familiar with the way this is laid out. I kind of did skim over like pressures and timing. I did bump the shift time or lower the shift timing down a little bit. I'm just going to try it. Lower the shift times down a little bit, bump the oncoming pressure presets. Something weird about the offgoing pressure presets is they already had them like way maxed out, so not sure what's going on there. Typically I'll bump both of these on like a 6L80 or 6L90, and that will firm up the shifts. Will coincide with speeding up the shift timing, reducing shift times down. I don't know how fast you can go on with these transmissions, like a 6L80, 6L90, I'll usually have about 0.2 seconds, 0.25, 0.2, depending on the combination. And that's where they usually shift pretty good. 10Ls, you can go a little faster even, you know, 0.18, 0.17, and they'll shift that quick. Just in my experience, without getting too crazy, you know, with the stock trans. So, but I'm kind of digressing into trans stuff, and we don't need to talk about that right now. Like I said, the camshaft, I did bring, and for whatever reason, and maybe I'm missing something on this, this was not using the watt angle tables when you were at watt. What's propagated in these watt angle tables, like typically on LT1, LT4, will use the watt tables. This was not using that. It was simply using what was in the high, and obviously we're at high barrel right here in Wisconsin, we're at 700 feet. So, and I was able to bring a lot more advance into the exhaust. So you can see, click the right button here. You can see I'm 4.22 over factory, and that really helped bring the turbo in, and that's at, that kind of 2200 to 3600 is where I was able to bring in a lot more torque and a lot more boost. I know I was talking about trying not to bring too much boost in, but I was trying to kind of make the boost curve a little flatter so it wasn't just nothing, 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 and then all of it. When you roll onto the throttle, I was trying to get something there so it, it had 3-4 pounds of boost down in the 2500 RPM range, because that turbo really didn't want to make hardly any boost down there. This helped bring in a couple more pounds of boost just in that bottom end. And then again, I was able to kind of control it, where I kind of brought it down with the boost control. So I was trying to kind of make the engine as efficient as possible, and then I can control the boost with the solenoid and the duty cycle. So what else? I don't think there's much else. The speed density model was very accurate that I found from the factory. And again, I didn't have to do a whole lot with the MAF curve. I had to move it around a little bit to add some fuel. Power enrichment, for whatever reason, this is what I do. I usually shoot for a 0.8 lambda, which is 1.25 on an EQ ratio. Factory, this was factory, so hopefully you can read that blue, but you can see how lean it was. And this is based on manifold temperature. Not sure why they do this. Again, I tried even 1.1, and again, maybe just because of the additional boost over stock I'm running, but I ended up at my typical 0.8 lambda commanded, and that's where it was happy. That's where it made the most power, and that's where it would take the most timing and the most boost. So I just took this table and just made it all 0.8 lambda 125 EQ ratio, because that's what it liked. It's, when I was rolling onto the throttle, even when it was making down on the bottom end here, I tried leaning it out down here at 2000 RPM when you're first rolling onto the throttle. I tried having it at 0.85 lambda, knock like crazy. Even at just pound and a half or whatever this is, 3 pounds of boost, it did not like it. So did the tried and true, richen it up all the way across, able to put more timing, bring some more boost in but down here. Now obviously that may reduce the fuel economy a little bit, maybe that's what they're after. But he was kind of interested in making some horsepower too. He didn't want all these parts to go to waste, so I was trying to get the most out of it, trying to kind of get a happy medium between the two. So I was bringing the power enrichment in anything more than 60% throttle, so I usually will do 50% on a performance application, but I figured, let's raise that a little bit. So and you can kind of see, like rolling up onto it kind of slowly, you can see the boost. I'm hitting 90 kPa at 47% throttle there, and so I kind of figured we can kind of fudge it out a little farther, 100 kPa at 50% throttle. So I just raised that a smidge. The factory was, I think, 80% throttle before you're into power enrichment. And I also did leave some of the delay on, so there's still that little bit of delay. So let's say he does kind of roll onto it for a second or so to just kind of get up an on-ramp and then lets off. It's not right into power enrichment and dump a whole bunch of fuel. I did find that because of the way this turbo was at these lower RPMs, it didn't want to the boost didn't just want to take off immediately, that it didn't need the air-fuel ratio to completely dump to full boost air-fuel ratio, 0.8 lambda immediately. So kind of played with all that with the, again, daily drivability type fuel economy stuff in mind, because this isn't just a race car. But yeah, I think before I keep rambling here, I think I'm going to cut the video off. There was kind of a lot to talk about here. A little bit more complicated, I guess, than there's just a lot more to, these turbo cars. And this crosses platforms, over to the EcoBoost Ford stuff, like if I'm doing a 2.7 or a 3.5 truck or something. Kind of similar to this, where it's based on, there's another table that I did have one more table I did want to talk about. And it was the, again, if I can find it here, this well, this one too, I did play around with this one. It's another pressure factor. I did lower it down here again to try to soften this down here and raise it up here just a smidge. But this table is a big one on this platform. This is the amount of air mass allowed per spark degree, or spark retard. So when there's no spark retard, this is the air mass that you are kind of targeting or allowing. And I did raise this quite a bit at the top end. The factory table was like this. I did actually pull some out here, again, trying to soften the bottom end just a little bit, trying to slow the turbo down on a smidge. Again, trying to get a smooth power curve. This is what I found what worked. But I did add quite a bit up here to hold that boost line all the way to the top. So you can kind of see the difference. But then again, I tried to leave when you start getting a decent chunk of knock to pull it back to where the stock values are, so we're not hurting stuff. So that was another table that made a big influence on kind of tailoring the power. So there was kind of 5 or 6 things here that all had to be right just to get it where it is now. Leaving the stock stuff, it was all over the place. I tried just stock and it was over boost, under, and then the dyno graph was like it was a disaster. It was not even close. So yeah, it took me quite a while because again, I did not have a file to compare to where I could just start, kind of comparing and using some previous data that I had. I had to, again, for me personally, I had to build this from scratch. And I like doing that. I don't like trying to get online and copy somebody else's tune because A, I don't always trust that, and B, this is how I learn. So now if I ever had one of these come in again, I know exactly what to do. Or if he wants to go farther with it, like let's say he does want to put bigger injectors in it and take the cat off, and maybe we can bring a couple more pounds of boost into it, we can do that, and I won't have to spend all day on it because I'll know exactly what to do and exactly what to change. We'll probably have to screw with that duty cycle table a little bit because pulling the restriction off the turbo is going to want to make it spool even faster. And but I can do that. I know how to do it. I know how to manipulate that system now. So I'm going to cut this video off before this thing is an hour long. So just so you guys know what I went through today, the fun I had. So again, that's that power curve. And I don't know how much these cars weigh. I mean, I know this isn't a lot of power, in the days of 4-digit numbers here, but for a nice little daily driver, this is what he was after. He was after just making the parts he put on it work together so he could drive it again. And he's looking for that 40 miles to the gallon. He came in the other day or stopped by yesterday and I kind of discussed what was going on with it and stuff. And he's like, yeah, I just want to stop driving my plow truck and I want my 40 miles to the gallon. So that was a big thing for him as a nice daily driver that he can cruise back and forth to work. So yeah, that'll wrap it up for this one, guys. I really appreciate you guys watching. If you're still watching after a lengthy discussion on 1.4 turbo GM stuff. But yeah, thanks for watching, and check back on our social media for all the stuff coming down the line. Guys are at the racetrack this weekend in Arkansas. They're at Ozarks International Raceway for a P1 Sessions track day. Track events that we are hosting. We're doing 3 of them this year, and next year we're probably going to be adding more at different tracks, maybe Atlanta. Jim and Chuck have been talking about doing some more tracks, so if you guys are interested in road race stuff, check that out, P1 Sessions. So thanks for watching, guys. We'll talk to you later.